So I came across this video that I watched, I want to say maybe a week ago, and I found a comment that was interesting, but unfortunately when I found the video, I couldn't find the comment, so this person must have deleted it. But I do remember what the commenter said, and what they said was how they're basically 20 years old, and they felt like they haven't accomplished anything in their lives. They look at their past, and the comment said like I've been on this earth for 20 years, but I felt like I haven't done anything, and feel like my life is pointless. Now, obviously, that's a very nihilistic way of thinking. But it's probably more common than people think. I experienced this myself a little bit, right? I think it's somewhat normal, but it's also not very good because this way of thinking is sort of like I don't want to say like victim's mentality, but it's there's definitely one that you do not want, say at least. You don't want to have this type of way of thinking. But there are two ways of reasons for why I could think of why you would have this type of way of thinking. And the first one is self-esteem, and the second one is social media. Obviously, I'm not going to go too big of a tangent here, but I'm going to touch on it a little bit. Here's kind of the problem when it comes to social media and comparing yourself to other people. When you're so caught up at looking at somebody else's lives and what they've accomplished, you don't acknowledge at the things that you have accomplished, right? So you take things for granted. You're not grateful, and there's no sense of gratitude because you're too caught up at looking at what someone else has versus what you have. So you're unable to acknowledge the progress that you've made, right? And one good example of this is how I had this instance in the gym, and I think this was last week on Thursday, and I came across the guy I was working with on the pull-up stand or bar, whatever you want to call it. And this guy I asked him if I can work in with him, and he said yes. And then I said I like your shirt because he was wearing a Goku black shirt. And he was like, "Oh, thanks, bro. Do you watch anime?" And I was like, "Yeah, a little bit." The most recent one I watched was like Chainsaw Man. They asked me, "Do you watch the movie?" I said, "Yeah." And we talked for a little bit. And then one thing that he mentioned was how he said he wanted to get on the level that I was on, right? He said like I'm trying to get on your level, bro, or I'm trying to get on your level. Um, so I'm assuming that he wants to, I guess, be as strong as me, right? Because I was doing weighted pull-ups, so it's a little bit more of like an intermediate move. I wouldn't call it like a beginner friendly, but it's possible, right? I would say probably 6 months you would easily. In 6 months, if you like, lock it down, could probably do a plate or more on a pull-up. It's not, in my opinion, it doesn't really. Obviously, got to be strong, but it's not the most difficult thing, right? It's not like benching 225. Um, but that was pretty cool because this guy, I don't want to say like he kind of looked up to me, but he I guess respected me, or saying that he wanted to get my level. And I kind of took it at face value. I didn't think much of it. Didn't really say anything because I didn't think much of it. But then when I reflect on it and I kind of think about myself, right? Because I'm always looking at these other fitness influencers and stuff like that, and I want to have their physiques and have their strength. And then it's funny when someone else wants to be at my level, right? So that just goes to show how far I've really come, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. It is super important to acknowledge that there's always going to be someone that wants to be in your position, even though you might not think you're in a great position, right? It's kind of like the how there's always a bigger fish, right? That guy is comparing himself to me, and I'm comparing myself to someone else. So it's kind of like the cycle of never ending of I'm not good enough and stuff like that, right? But it's really once you kind of think once you kind of think of this as a more from a logical perspective, you start to understand that there really is no point in what's it called in comparing yourself to other people, right? I had a guy when I was doing some preacher curls, and I saw this guy that was on a incline bench, and he was benching 275. Very impressive weight, right? If you can do 275 on an incline bench, you are really strong, right? I want to say this guy was maybe early 40s or late 30s, maybe like maybe 38, 39 ish. But either way, right? This guy was super strong, man. That was a very impressive lift. So that guy might be one of the biggest guys in the gym, right? So there's always gonna be someone that's bigger than you, smarter than you, has more money than you, maybe looks better than you. So there's really no point in comparing yourself. There's just no point. But you will gain more from comparing yourself to yourself once you start to realize how far you've really come, which is really great in terms of your own self-esteem. So that's kind of the main one I want to leave with with this one. I think I'm gonna go to here and move on to the next topic because I don't want to linger on one topic for too long. I don't want to make this video too long.
In order to train as hard as possible, you must retain a clear image of your purpose. Once your goal is sharply but realistically defined, all that remains is carrying out your plan. Don't, however, worry about your individual potential. Potential is only the expression of a possibility, something that can be assessed accurately only in retrospect. In other words, you'll never know how good you might have become unless you try. So let's get with it.
Okay, so that clip was a quote from Mike Menser, probably one of my favorite quotes of all time, besides the one with Tom Platz and David Hoffman, right? I don't think anything can beat that, in my opinion, besides maybe the Arnold one, for those that know, you know. Um, but the reason why I played that quote from Mike Menser is because I think that really fits well with the second point that I wanted to bring up, which is I know the mentality and mindset seem kind of like corny or it's cheesy. You know, I know a lot of people, and for good reason why I think people would say it's corny or cheesy. Um, but I do think that there's something powerful when it comes to the kind of the way that you think. Right, you can look at it and go, you know, I'm going back to the comment of that person said, you know, I'm 20 years old, haven't. So this guy's relatively about my age. I'm only about 2 years older than him. But kind of going back to the comment of, you know, I'm 20 years old, I haven't accomplished anything in my life, versus if you kind of think about it this way, because I haven't accomplished anything, that means I can do anything. If you really think about it, right? Because you haven't done anything, that means that anything is possible, right? I think we're gonna use like another cliche, like the blank canvas. You can do whatever you want with the canvas because it's blank. You can use pastel, you can use water paint. Maybe you want to mix some colors. Maybe you want to just use a pen and paper, or pencil, pencil crayons. You know, whatever. You can do whatever you want because it's a blank canvas. You can do whatever. And kind of what I'm getting at there is most people will look at it as like a depressing way of how they haven't done it. And in a way, I can see why they would do that because I guess it could be depressing that you haven't or you felt like you haven't accomplished anything significant, right? No trophies, no medals, or maybe you regret not playing any sports in high school and stuff like that. Um, but at the same time, I think if you look at it the other way that it's just said, it's a lot more powerful than you think, guys. In my opinion, the idea and just knowing that anything is possible and you can accomplish anything because you haven't done anything that's significant is pretty powerful, guys. Um, and that's kind of one of the things that drives me is it's exciting. You know, am I going to be successful or am I not going to be successful or what am I gonna look like if I keep staying consistent to weight training or and kind of stuff like this, right? Because you never know. But it's kind of important to not let that anxiety overcome overcome you and kind of make you want to give up, right? I think I'll use kind of interesting saying, right? A lot of people say that without purpose, there's no point in living. But I'd kind of make a different argument. I would say if you're driven, then purpose doesn't matter too much. But if you have a purpose but you're not driven, then you're kind of in trouble, right? Because at least the person who's driven and works really hard and wants to push themselves and is excited about life, they're kind of moving forwards, right? You can know where you want to be, but if you're not going to take the actions to get to where you want to be, that doesn't really matter too much. So that's what I'm gonna leave off at with the second one, and then I'll go jump to the third topic, which is probably the last one. So there's a lot of YouTube videos, and they're kind of a little more clickbaity, but their title is something like "What You Need to Do in Your 20s in Order to Become Successful." And there's a lot of pressure right now, and a lot of people say that if you mess up your 20s or if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're gonna fall behind, and then you're gonna be a loser in your 30s and blah blah blah. Now, what's interesting is when you kind of watch a lot of these videos and you see the speaker and the person who is talking and giving their experiences. So this might be like a 40 or 45-year-old or 50-year-old talking about their 20s. One common theme that I notice, that a lot of these guys will say, is something like, I wish I would have studied harder or partied less or didn't hook up with a bunch of random people and wasted my time, or I should have went to the gym and worked harder on my body and got in better shape, or maybe start that business and stuff like that, right? But the irony of that is that's not really something they should regret, man, in my opinion. I don't know why there's just a lot of negative stigma. Liking, and that's another thing that is kind of interesting that I'm kind of against, which is weird because I'm not really a party type of guy. I think you guys know that. um, but the reason why I'm kind of against that is those are kind of like the fun aspects of your life, and if you kind of forget about those fun aspects in your life, then you're gonna be end up becoming very miserable. As this was another YouTube video that I watched under the comments. Fortunately, couldn't find it, but it was a very good comment. And basically, what it said was how they had a friend, and she basically took her own life, and she got a master's degree. So very, very good. That is very, and you probably make easily six figures and more. I'm guessing like 150,000 or more with the masters, I guess, depending on what you're going into. But you can like that's a very like I say prestigious, but it's a lot more. That's higher level than a degree itself, right? That's a branch over it or level above it. So it's obviously not hard to get, and obviously she studied a lot and probably just spent a lot of time by herself. But she kind of what she said was how she would compare herself to the friend, right? And she would say that he got to experience the college experience of partying and having fun, and she didn't. So I guess that kind of lack of social connections and kind of missing out. She must have been like really in a bad state in terms of mentality to do that. Which just goes to show you guys that success is not everything. When people take their own lives because of stuff like that, it's not a joke. So you have to understand, and that's where decision making and critical thinking skills are really important. Because one problem when it comes to school is they don't really teach you a lot. They don't teach you finances or relationships. Not that they're supposed to, because they're not really supposed to do that. That's something you have to learn, and when you become an adult, that's something you have to figure out on your own, right? That's one thing that happens when you become an adult is they kind of toss you on the world, and you have to experience the world on your own. So it's kind of scary. You have a lot more responsibilities, right? The job offer that I got, which starts in March, if I end up taking it, I have to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. So I'm gonna be driving there by myself, and then be working the shift, and then heading to the gym afterwards by myself, and doing a lot of things by myself, right? So there's a level of independence, and when you're by yourself, a lot of decision making skills have to be at play, and critical thinking skills. So I would say the third one that I think is really important when it comes to your life in general is decision making and kind of being your own a guide. So that's gonna do it for me, guys. I'll see you guys next time.